Welcome, everyone. This is a Plastic Club Salon. It feels like we haven't done one of these special salons in a while, but hopefully there will be more. There actually might be more on Howard Pyle because I know Tracey has been researching this for months now, and she has way more than an hour, probably way more than 5 hours of stuff that she could talk about. But today we're going to focus on the Plastic Club. Tracey, as you know, has been a Plastic Club member for a very long time and is an accomplished painter, as well as dabbler in other media, and also an accomplished writer. So we're very grateful to her for doing this project, which I know took an enormous amount of time and research, and for her to bring it to us. So this is gonna, well, I'll let Tracey introduce the characters, including Howard Pyle. But as you all probably know, Howard Pyle is known as the father of American illustration. He was a very prominent, not only illustrator and author, but a teacher of illustrators during the golden age of American illustration at the turn of the century. And he was located here in Philadelphia at the heart of the American publishing industry. And due to that fact, he also happened to teach many of the women artists who founded the Plastic Club. Now I'm giving Tracey's talk for her, so I will shut up and let her take over. Tracey, thank you.
All right. First, I'll talk a little bit about my research. I started working on this with Rachel Delatario down in the archives at the Delaware Art Museum. She's the archivist, in July. And she was so wonderful. She brought me files of Howard Pyle's students' journals and notes and extensive writings. And I took pictures of everything, all those files, and I handled them very carefully. It was amazing. And she'd bring me books and articles and all kinds of things. She devoted a lot of time to this. And then I said, okay, we're not doing this until the winter time. I've got to stop. I have to go write a play about the Red Rose Girls. So I did that. And I wrote the play, and then I went on vacation, and then I called her and said, okay, it's time for me to come back. And I did. And once again, she brought me books, notes, and anything I requested that she could look up or the archives actually had. She lent me books to take home, which I think was maybe against the rules, but I guess she trusted me. She gave me a few Howard Pyle books. Very nice. And she introduced me to a Howard Pyle scholar named Jan Schoenherr, who seems to know just about everything. So I had great email correspondence with him. And I'm just very grateful to these two people, as well as Pyle student Frank Schoenherr's grandson, John. I spoke with him, and it's just great to have all these resources right here. I hope these salons on specific artists continue. I'm not going to do them because right here I have all the resources on Howard Pyle and the Plastic Club. And that's it for me. But other people can do talks on artists. That would be great. Hey, Howard Pyle. He was born in 1853. His father owned a leather shop, so he made all kinds of leather things like, I don't know, saddles and jackets and belts and all the stuff you make out of leather. Well, Howard didn't really want to continue in that business. He decided when he was about 13 that he wanted to be an artist. And he was very serious about that. So when he was 15, his family sent him to Philadelphia. Now, he didn't go to Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, at least not immediately. He studied with a classical artist who was trained in Antwerp, Belgium, by the name of Francis van der Wielen. And Francis taught him all the traditional things. They worked with plaster casts of body parts and did all the good art stuff. And then Howard Pyle went to PAFA. And then he went to the New York Art Students League and studied up there. He started his career in New York. Could we have slide number 2? Next slide. This is his Franklin Street studio today. He built it or had it built, and it is in use today by the women and men artists who are members of the studio group. They show their work on Friday nights, first Friday in the month, Art Loop nights. So the building is still functioning. You can go tour it. They're glad to have you. He used it back then too, and later on in the presentation, you're going to see what it looked like 120 years ago. But anyway, slide number 3, please. Howard Pyle as an artist. So he made this decision, he was going to be an artist. And he didn't look like this then. But when he got up to New York, he decided he was going to be an illustrator while studying at the Art Students League. And he worked on that. His illustrations weren't all that great. A lot of black and white pen and ink drawings, but to be an illustrator, you had to work with the illustrating technology of the time, the printing technology. And he wasn't very good at that. So his drawings were good, but they would make the printing presses print his work all blobby and blurry. And one of his employers at the St. Nicholas Review, I believe it was called, actually sent him to the guy who patented the wood block printing process that they put certain chemicals on to learn how to draw so it would work with the printing process. And his drawings did get better. I wish I had one for you, but I put the presentation together really fast. So I don't, sorry about that. Now, why was Howard Pyle known as the father of illustration? This is why. Because his illustrations were from his imagination. He was very careful about being historically accurate, and he really believed in adventure. But more importantly, he followed the story. He wanted to make the story come alive and do more than just draw a picture that said, this is what's happening. La, 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 la. He wanted to become the creator of the story enough so that a reader would say, oh, this is amazing. I have to read more. I have to read very deeply. Of course, he was technically skilled with all the training at PAFA and with his Belgian artist, but the imagination is what makes his painting so real, so alive. Now, one time he was out with some of his male students in the fall collecting a bunch of nuts to eat as a snack or a meal, I don't know. And they saw a bunch of nuts, chestnuts probably, had fallen into a stream. And he said, well, there's nothing to do for it. So he rolled up his pants and he rolled up his sleeves and he walked into that freezing cold stream and got the nuts from the floor of the stream. But of course, he had to turn it into a lesson. So, and N.C. Wyeth, his student, recorded this. He said, the poor soldiers at Valley Forge felt the cold, just as we feel the cold now. The ragged lot that marched against the Hessians at Trenton felt the icy water and the numbing cold. I don't believe it's possible to paint a picture of that sort within the four walls of your studio unless you feel the cold, even as they did. So there you go. If he wasn't feeling it himself, like if he wasn't fighting or plunging into cold water, which he was doing, but if it wasn't real, he was at least really imagining it. What would this feel like? And how can I make that come across to the reader? And I really identify with that because I've been struggling to do it for decades now. Well, it didn't take him so long. He was actually passed away before he'd reached my age. So I don't know, maybe eventually there will be hope for me. But he also said it's not the mere outward part, the part the eyes see, that holds the interest, but what the soul feels. So if you're an illustrator and you can do that, then you're ahead of the game. In Lake Flynn, as they say. Illustration is not a standalone, and he recognized that. These are works of art to the artist who is creating them, but they are like spice to food. If you've got a potato, it's just a potato. Maybe a story is like a potato. But if you add the butter and maybe baking bits and sour cream and cheddar cheese, that potato is pretty amazing. Well, that's what illustration is. It's all the accoutrements to that potato, and it makes the potato a really wonderful thing. Well, Pyle recognized this, and his publishers recognized this, because if people really wanted to read the stories, people were going to buy their magazines. People were going to buy their books. So he was a very, very popular guy. He was a hero to Norman Rockwell. He was admired greatly by Vincent van Gogh, or Van Gogh, however you want to pronounce it. He was really admired by quite a few very prominent artists you wouldn't even think of, but people knew he had some magic and they wanted it. Well, next slide, please. One of his bits of magic was capturing the supreme moment in a story. And this is called Attack on the Galleon. And it's from one of his books, I believe. I forget which one. He was very into pirates. And this is the moment right before the little pirate boat attacks that galley to get all the treasure. And you look at it and you're just waiting for it to happen. It's about to happen. The anticipation is there. And that's the moment he knew he had to capture, because that's that penultimate bit is just when your blood is really racing. That's going to make you say, oh, I have to keep reading. So this is just, I can't say it's magic quite enough, because it really was. Now, his technique, this is not an old painting. I've seen illustrations from the 1870s that he did, and those were just black and white drawings, and they contained hints of this. This is a later color illustration. His illustration theories and abilities advanced when he could work with the printing techniques which had advanced. When photo engraving came along, when the 3 different plates of cyan, yellow and magenta came along to make all your colors and black, and that was all put together, that produced the color illustration magic. Photo engraving first. But Pyle knew to make these big paintings that are quite impactful on their own, and for an illustration, they'd be shrunk down and even more powerful because they were so rich. And he also knew the magic of manipulating that illustration. What are you focusing on? What is the important part of that penultimate moment? Well, it is in this scene, it was the galleon. It was about the attack, or not the galleon, it was the little pirate boat in the attack of the galleon. The galleon is sitting there completely serene, but it's in the background. The important part is the attack, and you can see the energy and emotion of the water of the pirates as they're sailing up to that galleon that is just innocent, ignorant, in calm water. See, it's calm back there, but for some reason it's it's not stormy but hectic up here. And well, that wouldn't happen in a real ocean scene, would it? The ocean's really turbulent right here, but it's very calm back there. However, it adds to the painting, because we've got to have that anxiety, that excitement. And then we've got to know the galleon was not expecting that. And that's fabulous too, because you don't even notice it unless you look close. There's another thing that he really believed in. And the next slide is going to be really important because it was an actual painting did. However, the power of subtraction, focus. What is the important part of the story? The painting is called Marooned. And if you know your pirate lore, what happened when someone was marooned is they were left on a desert island with no food, no drink, nothing but a gun, so they could kill themselves when they got too tired of being alone and starving to death. Now, here is the black and white study for Maroon that he painted. And as you can see, well, the ocean's frothing in the distance, and it's a pretty thick band of water there. And there's a big guy sitting on a beach, and he's right by the edge of the water. But then Howard Pyle thought about it, and he thought, what is the real point of this story that I'm telling with my illustrative work here? The point is the guy is marooned. The point is the desolation, the misery, the loneliness. You're not even supposed to really care about the water. So the water is a suggestion on the end of the horizon. The pirate himself is reduced. So you're not really looking at him and saying, now look at that shirt and look at the expression on his face. What you're concentrating on is how very empty that picture is. It's sky and it's dry land and this tiny, dejected, helpless figure in the middle of it. And that's just absolutely magnificent. I would take my head off to Howard, but he's been gone for quite some time. Now, Howard Pyle was in the right place at the right time. I mean, sometimes magic works better than other times and in other places. Howard was part of what is called the golden age of illustration. And that started with the advances in printing, going from metal engraving to wood, which was easier to engrave, to electroplated wood, which made the image better, to some acid, to I don't know what acid did, but it worked really well. And then to the photo engraving, where you could actually put your photo image on a copper plate and say in the Civil War or right after the Civil War, maybe a reporter could take a photograph of a story he was writing in the morning and have it out the same day in the newspaper. And that was just great. Well, Howard Pyle and his magic was perfectly contoured to that. And he thought along with those advances, also paper. At the time of the Civil War, paper was just made of linen rags, and it was costly. It was not really easy to produce. And then it became just, well, it was discovered that you could make paper from wood pulp really cheaply and really efficiently. Publishing exploded with these two things. 1864, I believe, carbon black ink was invented. So the ink wasn't a faded mix of colors. The eagle printing company. That, never mind, that's kind of irrelevant. But anyway, during the Civil War, there were 500 periodicals published in the United States. By 1890, excuse me, there were 7,000. That's quite a difference in number. Well, publishing really exploded. It happened to be in New York and Philadelphia. So Howard Pyle and his fairy dust had access to the publishing world. The publishing world had access to him. With him and with other illustrators in this explosion in publishing came demand. So the people were reading these stories. They knew that the printing advances had happened. They wanted quality. They said, the pictures have to be better. And he could meet that need. And he was advertisement for the publishers, advertisement for the writers. And his art was pretty good too. Wait, maybe I shouldn't say art. Yeah. So his illustration was theater. Next slide, please. Look at that. I forget, I don't remember which year this was from, but I think this was pretty early on. Look at that, we're back to our supreme moment right before something really horrible happens, and you're waiting for something horrible to happen. It's like a film. And he staged it. He had actors in a story, or especially a book. He would have the same characters. He had his actors, and they had costumes, and the story was focused on them. And like a soap opera, just before something big happens, comes the commercial, and you just can't wait. What's going to happen next? Turn the page. You just got to do it. Everyone loved Howard because he just entranced everyone. Let's see. Next slide, please. Here we go. Okay, I did this so fast, I don't remember what pictures I used. This is an 1878 illustration of his. See the difference? Printing advances wouldn't have let him do what you've just seen. They just let him do this black and white. I don't know if this drawing had to be turned over to another illustrator to clean it up and make it ready for the clumsy printing press or not. But either way, it's just like, oh, so this is what's happening. Done. Oh, so what's going to happen next? Just like the rest of us, he had to learn. What he did. And as you know, it's wonderful he did. Well, he wasn't just a super rock star of illustration. He wanted to train other people to be rock stars in illustration. So he went to PAFA and asked if he could teach there. And they said, that's not art, tawdry illustration. We'll be on to that later. So he went to Drexel and said, you know, I would like to teach illustration here in this here trade school, since people regard illustration as a trade. Of course, it's an art, but it's a trade. People learn to illustrate. So next slide, please. was a picnic or a powwow or whatever you call it with a bunch of students at his Chadsford summer camp. When he taught at Drexel and he taught there for 6 years, he had, well, for a few years, he had a summer camp where he'd pick out the most promising of his students and he'd invite them to come to his house and some other buildings where they could stay and work in the studio and work outside and learn all kinds of different things working plein air than they would learn while working in the studio at Drexel. And so I can't name all these women here. Somewhere I have this photo with a lot of the women listed, but every single one of those is a Plastic Club girl. I can tell you that. I wish I could tell you exactly who, but it doesn't matter. Just so you know, they are Plastic Club women. So when he was teaching at Drexel, he didn't just say, okay, everyone who wants to study with me can come do it. They arrived with some classical training because he wasn't about classical training. He wasn't going to waste his time teaching them how to draw. He did want them to use some of that training. However, he had to get rid of it. Now, when I was studying, not with Howard Pyle, but with a guy who actually showed with one of Howard Pyle's students, name of Edward Loper, he was not fond of the people who had been to art school. He said, oh, they're the worst ones because they learn to do things in a certain way, a certain frozen, unmoving way. And Howard Pyle was about the imagination and theater and motion and drama. So he didn't want posed illustration. However, he wanted them to be able to draw. So he had to sort of unlearn them of their extremely formal classical training, but keep the technical skill. And he did that with some, and that's why he only taught at Drexel for 6 years, because he couldn't choose the students. They enrolled in his classes, and after 1900, he just said, I'm wasting a lot of time teaching people that aren't going to go on to do what I want them to, who can't really learn from me, or are going to go get married and have babies and stop with their careers, referring to the women, but more on that later. So anyway, he had the summer camp, and I think this picture is from 1899. Could be 1898, I'm not really sure. The summer camp, you can still see the buildings of it, but it's not called Howard Pyle's summer camp anymore. It's called the Brandywine River Museum, otherwise known as the Museum of Wyatt. Well, that's because NC was one of his students, really. But there's still a lot of Howard Pyle stuff there, if you look for it. And his house was actually owned by his wife's parents. Let's see. Okay, so you're looking at that picture. So he created 8 gazillion thumbnail sketches just to make sure he had everything just right. And he encouraged his students to do that. And Jesse Walcott Smith, if you know of her as one of the Red Rose girls, said, when I came under the tutelage of Howard Pyle, I began to think of illustration in a light different from that of a pot boiler. It wasn't just romantic drama. To illustrate a book was not something, just to do because you could do it. She was understanding that you really had to give yourself to it. Now, here's another of Pyle's. No, you can go back to this because I'm done. Pyle's things that he advanced. I talked about the subtraction, and I talked about the manipulation and finding your focus and all that great stuff. Now, the strength of a single idea, that's kind of like the subtraction idea, I guess. But this is pushing it in a different way. Right here, this painting is called The Flying Dutchman. And you can't see it up close. It's in the Delaware Art Museum, of course. But he's a freaky looking guy, like most undead people are. You probably know the story of the Flying Dutchman. It's the boat that's a ghost ship, but it keeps sailing around. That's the ghost ship captain. Really scary stuff. The painting is really scary too. I love it. Absolutely love it. So, oh dear, how am I doing on time? So, back to the technique thing. Pyle warned that too much emphasis on technique would result in a kind of mannered overindulgence where the means become more important than the message. So one of his students, I can't remember which one, said, in the 3 years I studied with him, he didn't mention materials or technique once. Well, no, that's not what he was teaching. Okay, this is the single idea. So he taught for his 6 years at Drexel, and then he taught 5 more at the Franklin Street studio you saw in the modern picture. And he resigned from Drexel, as I said, because he couldn't choose the students and he was wasting his time, or so he felt. One student he had even knitted while he lectured, and this drove him absolutely crazy. That might have been the proverbial straw that broke back for him. I'm not sure, but the woman knitting really, really upset him. He taught for free at Franklin Street. He taught for free in Chad's Ford also at his summer camp. He just really wanted to impart the idea that illustration had to have more quality. It couldn't just be a drawing. He wanted everyone to get this idea and make wonderful illustrations. And they really did. Now, the women were not really taught at Franklin Street. Some people say women were forbidden at Franklin Street, but Sarah Stillwell, Ellen Bernard Thompson, Ida Doherty, Dorothy Adams, they studied with him. Women were definitely allowed to attend the lectures he gave on Monday nights. So, none of the Plastic Club women, or the Red Rose girls at least, studied with him in Wilmington, but it could have been the distance. I don't know. He certainly did love them. He gave the women better grades. He had so many contacts within the publishing world. He set up a whole lot of his students, especially the women students, with book editors and the Scribner and Sons, HarperCollins, the publishers in Philadelphia. And most of the women, at least, had started out as professional or semi-professional artists, but his connections and his teaching elevated them all of their work. He went to Florence in 1910 because he was either going through a phase or he was just tired of illustration. And like I said, Maroon, which you saw way long ago, is a standalone painting. But he did some murals, not as many as Violet Oakley of Red Rose Girls fame, but he did mural work. And in 1910, when he went to Florence to study the old masters, part of the reason he was going was that he wanted to learn more about how to paint murals and how to paint frescoes. Unfortunately, he caught, he had an infection. I believe it was kidney infection. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something nasty and something painful. And in 1911, he died. He was 51 years old, somewhere in his early 50s. Do the math, 53. 1853 to 1911. He was old. Older than me, or was he younger than me? Somewhere around. I'm 53. But I think now we need to talk about the plastic. The Plastic Club was really important because the Plastic Club formed in 1897, and he knew about this, was a network of strength for women. Now, his students, more than 24 of them, who were in the Plastic Club, really benefited because, and there's an illustration of one of his students that turned into a Plastic Club woman, Charlotte Harding, is that's a picture of the modern woman with her portfolio going to her illustrating job. The illustrators, women in illustration was acceptable. Women in art, not so much. But illustration, I told you before, it was seen as a trade. And these poor women who couldn't get husbands, well, of course, it was acceptable for them to make a little money to, support themselves. Well, it wasn't enough to support themselves, but a little money. With the publication explosion, there was a huge need for more illustrators. So, of course, women were accepted. And the males who owned the publishing companies and such justified paying women less because, well, they didn't have families to support. They didn't generally have to survive on their own. And I'm sorry about that typo in illustration. I put this presentation together really fast, the slides. So was typing too fast for my fingers. Anyway, illustration was also considered by the art world to be decorative art. women were good at decoration. So PAFA was founded in 1805. Women weren't allowed even in till 1876. The New York School of Applied Design for Women was founded as a charity organization to teach them a trade. So these poor women could have a little money and not have to live on the streets. As I told you before, Howard Pyle was rejected by PAFA. He went to Drexel because it was a trade school. PAFA wanted him later. He said, no, forget you. Okay. So now we're jumping back to the plastic. Why was it so important? Because women were not looked upon as being capable artists, because the illustrators were not artists. And there were a whole lot of illustrators. Like I said, more than 24, just the Howard Pyle students were founding members of the club. Great. It was a female artist support structure. Their skill was seen at the Plastic Club. I have the PDFs of all the Plastic Club archives, courtesy of the Delaware Art Museum, and I will bring it in on thumb drive for you guys at the Plastic Club. Thank them, not me. But I was poring over all the old scrapbooks and the clippings from 1898-9 of, and further on, of all the work they did and all the exhibits they had. And they were very, very important to the media because they didn't just show female artists. They showed the work of male artists like William Merritt Chase, Howard Pyle, Thomas Oakley, another Pyle student, an artist called Joseph Pinnell, who was anti-Semitic and also a racist, but we will talk about that. He was a good artist. A lot of prominent artists contributed to their building fund. The Plastic Club used to rent space on 18th Street. And until 1909, they were in that space, but as they grew, they knew they needed to have their own space. So they had a fund going so they could buy the building on Comac. And let's see, William Merritt Chase, Campbell Cooper, William Glackens, Howard Pyle, and John Sloan of the Ashcan School, if you know anything about that. Another big thing in the Delaware Art Museum, we have a lot of John Sloan work if you want to come see it. They contributed funds or paintings that could be auctioned to raise funds to build or find a space for the Plastic Club. Not build it. Plastic Club had the first exposition of Japanese prints in Philadelphia, and that's a big deal because that's pretty famous. And I mean, Japanese print work is famous all over the world, but for Philadelphia to have it in early days, and especially this little women's art club to have it, it's a big deal. So they did a lot. And when Howard Pyle died, all his students involved in the Plastic Club had a memorial for him. And it was an exhibit with the artwork that they did. And I have a letter, I think, no, it's not the next slide, but a couple of Pyle's male students came and spoke at this memorial exhibition. Now here I have 10 illustrations by the Pyle Trained Plastic Club members, and just run through these 10 slides, not really fast, but this is a Native American woman who studied with Howard Pyle named Angel Licora, and she was a teacher at the Carlisle Indian School, which is another disgraceful thing, but she was a very good illustrator also. And she was a later student of his at Drexel. Next slide. Okay, this one is called Just Issued, The Ape, the Idiot, and Other People. And this was Elizabeth Shippen Green. No, I'm sorry. This was Anna Whelan Betts who did this. Next one. This one is, who did this? Well, I can't remember who did this. The initials are in the corner. Ah, Bertha Corson Day. She has a whole wall at the Delaware Art Museum. There's a little room, alcove, that's just filled with Plastic Club women or Howard Pyle students, if you have to say that. Okay, next. This is called The Pied Piper. We're running out of time because I'm talking too much. So why don't we just go through these? Just spend a few seconds on each slide. And you can call me if you have questions about it. Next. And this is Elizabeth Shippen Green. She was one of the Red Rose girls. Next. I think this is, who is this? Not Sarah Stillwell. I can't make out that signature right. But anyway, it's another artist. And this is Sarah Stillwell. I remember this. And this is Violet Oakley. So at least they've got the Red Rose girls covered. Jessie Wilcox Smith, the last of the Red Rose girls. Now this is Howard Pyle and a bunch of his students at a picnic in Valley Forge. Again, all those women, and unfortunately I can't name each one of them, but they're all Plastic Club ladies. Okay, now next one. This is a letter from Frank Schoonover, who spoke at Howard Pyle's memorial at the Plastic Club, and he also went to a lot of their exhibits. And he was friends with those women, excuse me, and very supportive of them. What did Howard Pyle think of it? Well, I've got some literature that says he didn't allow women, and he was mad at the Plastic Club women because they were supposed to be loyal to him, and they went and deserted him, and they were loyal to the Plastic. But that's kind of ridiculous. Now, he donated money, did at least one lecture in their 18th Street rental quarters on composition. He donated paintings. He exhibited work at the Plastic Club. So he supported them. He was delighted because he knew the women needed that network to stay strong. In fact, when they were students, he used to use the network of his women students. So-and-so, would you please talk to so-and-so and tell her to tell so-and-so to do this? Could you tell so-and-so to bring these things to class? So he understood how important that network was for them as well as it had been for him. That's my opinion, even though some disturbing articles say otherwise. That's also Ian Schoenhaer's, excuse me, opinion, because we had a big email back and forth about this. Next slide. What were his thoughts on women? Now, again, women were supposedly excluded from his Franklin Street studios and from his summer camp after he left Drexel. But from everything I've read, I wouldn't say Howard Pyle disliked women. He just disliked the wars of the time. He didn't think illustration was a trade that poor little women could do because it wasn't real art. He thought it was real art, all right, and he supported those women and tried to his best to advance his career, their careers, excuse me. So I think he was a great guy, and I think he contributed to the stability and strength of the Plastic Club. So I'm all for Howard Pyle. And before I started this quest, I didn't really know all that much about him, but I'm really glad I do now. So in the little time we have left, questions?
I have a question for you, Tracey. What did motivate you to go on this quest?
Well, I live in Wilmington, Delaware, and all you sophisticated urbanites think I live in a provincial town. Well, let me tell you, without my town, you sophisticates at the Plastic Club just may not be here right now. No. I really wanted to learn more about Howard Pyle, and I knew the vague truth that he had taught a lot of Plastic Club women, and I was really curious about that. I also knew I had a lot of resources right at my fingertips. I didn't have to go too far with my PC and with the Delaware Art Museum and with Brandywine River Museum to learn all that I did learn.
I can't see everyone, so please feel free to speak up if you have a question. Mike?
You know, I read that email from Alice Meyer Wallace in telling you that a member of ours, Harriet Klein.
Harriet Klein.
Did you get in touch with her?
I did not get in touch with Harriet Klein.
She's some relation to Howard Pyle. That's what.
Yeah. I think she's involved with the studio. She may be part of my Pen Women group. I'm not sure about that, but I can get in touch with her. I asked Alice if she was upset about that, because Better Call Harriet sounded a little ominous, but Alice said, no,
No, not on.
doesn't even know about this, so,
Yeah, I haven't seen Harriet
I would
in
like to
a
talk to
long time at the club, but she's a paid up member, so she's still around somewhere.
I just didn't have the time, you know, I found out about that 2 days ago, but I will.
Okay.
So another question for you, Tracy. Do you think that any of Howard Pyle's students surpassed him in success, either monetarily or otherwise?
NC Wyeth. And maybe not NC alone, because he died in what, 1945? He died young, before Jamie was born, at least. But that was, you know, the Wyeths are a whole dynasty of artists, and NC really started the whole thing. So I don't know if you can say NC surpassed Howard Pyle, because everyone says, wow, the Wyeths and NC so famous, so fabulous. But what if Howard Pyle hadn't died so young? He would maybe be even more ingrained in the minds of so many artists who admire him. I mean, his legacy lives on. The work I'm about to submit to the next show is the most illustrative work I've done ever. And probably because I've been looking at these paintings and drawings for months.
I have a question. You said Pyle was frustrated with Drexel. Did any significant students come out of his Drexel classes, or were they all
Well,
from his other?
The women of the Plastic Club, the Red Rose Girls, Charlotte Harding, Sarah Stillwell Weber, Bertha Corson Day. One of his students, in fact, Ellen Bernard Thompson, married his younger brother, Walter, and her daughter, Carolyn, married Nathaniel Wyatt. He was NC's brother. And she started illustrating again after he died, because she had to raise her family, but she taught her kids art. So, you know, the dynasty just went on and was strengthened with all the Wyeth and Powell DNA there. But yeah, the women of Pyle's tutelage became famous, and then NC Wyeth, Frank Schoonover, Stanley Arthur, Harvey Dunn, Clyde DeLand. I think he actually spoke at the memorial service at the Plastic Club. There were a whole lot who are not well known outside of the illustration world, but more than I named. I just think of them.
So there were some worthy students at Drexel.
Oh, yes. Yes, Schoonover started the Drexel, if I recall. He's from New Jersey.
Okay.
And then he moved to Wilmington after Drexel, because he wanted to continue with Pyle.
One more question. In one of our email back and forths, you mentioned that Pyle was a Quaker. And so I just wanted to ask you if that had much impact, or if you think that had any impact on his teaching, his relationships.
I think it had extreme impact on his eagerness to share his success, to share his what I call magic as an illustrator. His willingness to teach women and men equally. he said a few things that make you think, huh? But again, it's the role of women at the time, that the people women had to be successful. But some of the women he taught, the Red Rose girls are, the most prominent ones. They did very, very well beyond survival accounts, survival money. They were wealthy because of their illustration prowess. And a question I have for you, Bob, in one of the email exchanges, the one where I answered that we were lucky Pyle was a Quaker too, you had mentioned we were lucky, or he was lucky, Philadelphia was a Quaker town. And what did you mean by that?
I think actually I was referring to the women of the Plastic Club. That they were fortunate that Philadelphia was a Quaker town, and that it was the center of American publishing. And you went into this how this was a great fortune for Pyle as well. That all these things coming together, and I guess from that perspective, he had in a town that was more accepting of the idea that women could be equals, that gave him more quality students to draw from, instead of just men, for example, as it might have been in another location. That was just my speculation.
You're exactly right. At least from what I've learned, I would say you are.
I have another question, Tracey. Can you tell us, for people who are not familiar with the Delaware Art Museum, can you tell us about their collection as it pertains to your talk?
Yes. The Delaware Art Museum was started by Pyle students as, I forgot what the name of it was exactly, but it was just really turned into the Delaware Art Museum by Frank Schoonover. However, it was totally devoted to Pyle and Pyle's archives when it began. Now we have the biggest preraphaelite painting collection in the US. We're second only to the Tate in London. Oh, yeah, there we are at the Delaware Art Museum. Helen Farr Sloan lived here, and maybe you don't recognize that name, but her husband, John Sloan, was one of the most prominent artists of the early 20th century. And when she died, she donated more than 5,000 pieces to the art museum. So we have a huge Sloan collection. We have a lot of Frank Schoonover work. We have some pieces by an artist named Edward Looper, the man who taught me how to paint. We have one Edward Hopper called Summertime, and Mick Ricciaretto was just up at the Whitney and sent me the study for Summertime, which is better than the painting. But that's kind of neat. We have other pieces. We have a lot of mostly American art, but it's quite a jewel that you don't expect in a nice quiet little part of Wilmington, within walking distance of the Howard Pyle studios and also Frank Schoonover studios on Rodney Street. So,
well, I was impressed when I visited. I definitely recommend a visit to anyone
we have
in the area. And I gotta say, Howard Pyle's paintings are spectacular in person. I mean, he worked really big. And you know, and he was very cinematic, but seeing them in person, you know, there's some of them are actually breathtaking.
We have hundreds or maybe more than 1,000 works by Pyle's students, especially the female students, as in the Plastic Club women. We have a beautiful sculpture garden. It's on land with lots of walking paths. It's just a very lovely little gem of a museum. And unless I'm missing something, I gave all my guest passes to Susan and she's got them to hand out. It's also free on Sundays, thanks to a family known by the name of DuPont. So come down on Sunday and check it out. Yeah, pretty good stuff, isn't it? We also have a really good cafe. They have extremely flaky croissants in the bakery. Now that's one called the Mermaid that you're seeing right now. Pyle created that as a standalone easel painting. I don't know about, yeah. In 1910. This is, I know this painting. This is one of the Plastic Club members.
Elizabeth Shippen Green.
Ah, there you go. This is Howard Pyle's. He did a series of King Arthur books. He didn't just illustrate, he wrote a lot of books, not only the pirate literature, but a whole bunch of Old English King Arthur adventures. Good stuff. And they're illustrated in a way you'd expect medieval English art to look. It's neat.
This is N.C. Wyeth.
Yeah. There's Maroon. Maybe just my favorite, obviously. This is the Buccaneer was a dashing fellow, picturesque fellow.
Now I heard or I read that he just made up costumes for pirates without
Yeah.
it's just for dramatic effect. They're not historically accurate,
If
is what I understand.
true, that's true. That doesn't fall into that. Excuse me, of the historical accuracy claim of mine. But if you look at the Pirates of the Caribbean series and all the other pirate movies that have been done in the past couple decades, they all look like Howard Pyle's pirates. He is responsible for what we see as a pirate when we imagine it. Arg. Just like all our cowboys look like N.C. Wyeth's or Frederick Armington's, but mostly N.C. Wyeth's. Okay, I've got one more thing. And I bought it because after I turned in my borrowed copy, I had to read it again. But this is going to the Plastic Club. This here book, in the introduction, there's a thank you to a certain Michael Gwynn and his wife Cynthia for feeding the authors dinner and allowing them access to the Plastic Club archives. So this is for
Yeah,
Mr. Gwynn.
I remember them.
Cynthia.
I remember them down in the basement when we had the archives down there. And it was cold. It was, they were happy people though. They were very nice people. Yeah.
And you
We
fed
became
them, and
friends.
they appreciate that.
Yeah, we
You
had them
remember
for,
some
we put them
better
over in the
than
house.
I
gave him dinner.
Any more questions?
And I,
If you think of any later on, you can email me or call me.
your connection
I'm in the book.
I'd just like to ask Bob Lee about the recording. You know, I just got a text from somebody who said that they missed this. Is it being recorded? And I said, yes, it's being recorded, but what's the access?
Yeah, that's a good question because we have a huge backlog of recordings to process and put online. I don't know. Maybe we could, you know, put this at the head of the queue or work backwards. But yeah, it'll show up on our YouTube channel, I guess is the answer at some point.
Okay, so
Thank you,
you
Tracy.
for coming. I hope you're all fired up about Howard Pyle and how much more important the Plastic Club is than even all of us knew. And I have to go over all those archive PDFs again because it's just fascinating. Like,
Yeah,
wow.
if you ever come across your notes about who's in those photographs, you know, it would be great to have for the club.
Well,
Um,
I'm sure I'll be visiting Miss Deletario down in the gloomy basement library sometime soon. And so I'll get those names.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, we knew a lot of those names and a lot of those artists, but it's really nice to have the club put it in a context of what else was going on in the city of Philadelphia and in publishing, you know, and how the relationship between the illustrators and artists, that's really fascinating stuff that helps us understand the club better and where it came from. So thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Tracy.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Yes.
much.
And thank you
Well-
everyone for coming. And have a good night.
Thanks, Bob.
See you later. Bye-bye.